Andrea Yates might have become the most hated woman in the United States in 2001 when the news broke regarding her actions on the morning of June 20th in Houston, Texas. On that fateful morning, Mrs. Yates filled a bathtub with water. She then drowned her 5 children one by one in the bathtub. She laid the dead bodies of 5-year-old John, 3-year-old Paul, 2-year-old Luke, and 6-month-old Mary on her bed. She left her oldest, Noah, age 7, in the tub floating. This is the story of a mother who drowned all her 5 children to save them from going to hell. Andrea Pye Yates was born in Hallsville, Texas, the youngest of 5 children of Jutta Karen Kohler, a German immigrant, and Andrew Emmett Kennedy, whose parents were Irish immigrants. She had bulimia during her teenage years. She also had depression, and at age 17, she spoke to a friend about suicide. She graduated from Milby High School in 1982. She was the class valedictorian, captain of the swim team, and an officer in the National Honor Society. Yates completed a 2-year pre-nursing program at the University of Houston and graduated from the University of Texas Health Science Center at Houston. From 1986 until 1994, she worked as a registered nurse at the University of Texas MD Anderson Cancer Center. In summer of 1989, she met Russell "Rusty" Yates, an engineer at the Sunscape Apartments in Houston. They soon moved in together and were married on April 17, 1993. They announced that they would seek to have as many babies as nature allowed and bought a 4-bedroom house in Friendswood, Texas. Their first child, Noah, was born in February 1994, just before Rusty accepted a job offer in Florida, so they relocated to a small trailer in Seminole. By the time of the birth of their 3rd child, Paul, they moved back to Houston and purchased a GMC motorhome. Following the birth of her 4th child, Luke, Yates became depressed. On June 16, 1999, Rusty found her shaking and chewing her fingers. The next day, she attempted to commit suicide by overdosing on pills. She was admitted to the hospital and prescribed antidepressants. Soon after her release, she begged Rusty to let her die as she held a knife up to her neck. Once again hospitalized, she was given a cocktail of medications, including Haldol, an antipsychotic drug. Her condition improved immediately, and she was prescribed it on her release. After that, Rusty moved the family into a small house for the sake of her health. She appeared temporarily stabilized. Yates's first psychiatrist, Dr. Eileen Starbranch, testified that she urged her and Rusty not to have any more children, as it would guarantee future psychotic depression. They conceived their 5th and final child approximately 7 weeks after her discharge. She stopped taking Haldol in March 2000 and gave birth to her daughter Mary on November 30, 2000. She seemed to be coping well until the death of her father on March 12, 2001. Yates then stopped taking medication, mutilated herself, and read the Bible feverishly. She stopped feeding Mary. She became so incapacitated that she required immediate hospitalization. On April 1, 2001, she came under the care of Dr. Mohammed Saeed. She was treated and released. On May 3, 2001, she degenerated back into a near catatonic state and filled the bathtub in the middle of the day. She would later confess to police that she had planned to drown the children that day, but had decided against doing it then. She was hospitalized the next day after a scheduled doctor visit. Her psychiatrist determined she was probably suicidal and had filled a tub to drown herself. At the time of the murders, the Yates family was living in the Houston suburb of Clear Lake City. She continued under Dr. Saeed's care until June 20, 2001, when Rusty left for work, leaving her alone to watch the children against Dr. Saeed's instructions to supervise her around the clock. His mother, Dora Yates, had been scheduled by Rusty to arrive an hour later to take over for Andrea. In the space of that hour, Andrea drowned all 5 children. Andrea started with John, Paul, and Luke, and then laid them in her bed. As she was drowning 6-month-old Mary, Noah, 7, confronted her. "What's wrong with Mary?" he asked, and then, realizing what was happening, fled. Andrea chased Noah through the house, dragged him to the tub, and drowned him alongside his dead sister. She left him floating in the tub and laid Mary in John's arms in the bed. She then calmly called the police and asked them to come to her house, and called her husband, Rusty Yates, at his workplace. She told her husband to come home. When the police arrived, she flatly stated that she had killed her children and showed the officers the dead bodies. Mrs. Yates never denied the killings, but she later offered a bizarre explanation that she had killed her children to save them from hell. While in prison, Yates stated that she had considered killing the children for 2 years, adding that they thought she was not a good mother and claiming that her sons were developing improperly. She told her jail psychiatrist, "It was the 7th deadly sin. My children weren't righteous. They stumbled because I was evil. The way I was raising them, they could never be saved. They were doomed to perish in the fires of hell." At trial, both the prosecution and defense agreed that Mrs. Yates was mentally ill. A bright and successful registered nurse before her marriage, Mrs. Yates began suffering hallucinations after the birth of her first child. By the time of the killings, her history of mental illness was well established. She had attempted suicide twice, had self-mutilated, and had been hospitalized 3 times for psychiatric illness. Her depression was so severe that she sometimes stopped eating or drinking. She had suffered several psychotic breaks and numerous visual and auditory hallucinations. Yates confessed to drowning her children. Prior to her second trial, she told Dr. Michael Wellner that she waited for Rusty to leave for work that morning before filling the bathtub because she knew he would have prevented her from harming them. After the murders, police found the family dog locked up. Rusty advised Wellner that it had normally been allowed to run free, and was so when he had left the house that morning, leading the psychiatrist to allege that she locked it in a cage to prevent it from interfering with her killing the children one by one. Rusty got a family friend, George Parnham, to act as her attorney. Although the defense expert testimony agreed that Yates was psychotic, Texas law requires that in order to successfully assert the insanity defense, the defendant must prove that they could not discern right from wrong at the time of the crime. In March 2002, a jury rejected the insanity defense and found her guilty. Although the prosecution had sought the death penalty, the jury refused that option. The trial court sentenced her to life imprisonment in the Texas Department of Criminal Justice with eligibility for parole in 40 years. On January 6, 2005, a Texas Court of Appeals reversed the convictions because California psychiatrist and prosecution witness Dr. Park Dietz admitted he had given materially false testimony during the trial. In his testimony, Dietz had stated that shortly before the murders, an episode of Law and Order had aired featuring a woman who drowned her children and was acquitted of murder by reason of insanity. Author Suzanne O'Malley was covering the trial for the Oprah magazine, the New York Times magazine, and NBC News. She had previously been a writer for Law and Order and immediately reported that no such episode existed. 2 years later, in 2004, Law and Order Criminal Intent did air the episode Magnificat, based in part on Yates's case. The appellate court held unanimously that the jury might have been influenced by Dietz's false testimony, and therefore a new trial would be necessary. On January 9, 2006, Yates again entered pleas of not guilty by reason of insanity. On February 1, 2006, she was granted release on bail on the condition that she be admitted to a mental health treatment facility. On July 26, 2006, after 3 days of deliberations, Yates was found not guilty by reason of insanity, as defined by the state of Texas. She was thereafter committed to the North Texas State Hospital, Vernon campus. In January 2007, she was moved to the Kerrville State Hospital, a low-security mental facility in Kerrville, Texas, where she is till date.